Well, we're at that time of year when a lot of us make resolutions, and that includes gardeners as well. What plans do you have for your garden or your gardening habits in 2022? We are talking with Andrew Bunting. He is the Vice President of Public Gardens and Landscapes at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, an internationally recognized organization that was founded a long, long time ago. It's also the producer of the world-famous Philadelphia Flower Show, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And Andrew, thanks for joining us here on the Garden Basics podcast. Now, we touched a little bit about reducing the need to water, and of course, water-wise gardening, or the unfortunate term xeriscaping, is popular here in California, or actually it's downright the law. Do you find that there is an interest back there that despite all the summer rain you get, that people want to try water-wise gardening?
Yeah, we don't have the same drought situations that a large parts of California have, but we do have periods of drought. We might have, a couple months where we get hardly any water whatsoever. So I think there's, for those who want to just reduce water in general, that type of gardening might be appealing. I think out here, it's actually more of an aesthetic. Like, I love the kind of arid or kind of xeriscape gardens you see in, Santa Barbara and Southern California. And that, so that type of aesthetic is one that you often don't see around here. So what's starting to gain in popularity, and I've seen it actually across, I would say in the eastern part of the United States, and often where I look for trends is what are botanic gardens and arboreta doing? They're often some of the trend setting institutions. So, there's some really good examples of gravel gardens. So these are gardens that either just plant into the native soil and then top dress with gravel, or like at my house, I actually excavated out about 6 inches of soil and put in gravel and kind of grow plants right into the gravel, and it grows through the gravel into the soil below. So there's one of the best gravel gardens, I think, in the entire United States is at a botanical garden called Old Brick Botanic Gardens in Madison, Wisconsin. And they have multiple gravel gardens, kind of different, showing the public different ways in which they can use gravel aesthetically, as well as kind of the myriad of plants that you might grow in a gravel garden. And then out in this part of the country, there's some good public gardens like Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College uses gravel in multiple locations. And then a fairly famous garden in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Chanticleer, has a fairly extensive gravel garden. So it's I would say here it's almost more of a style of gardening that's gaining in popularity, because it also affords you the opportunity to maybe grow types of plants that perhaps you would see more in California, but we don't see that much in gardens here. Things like yuccas, hardy cactus, other succulent plants. A lot of some succulent plants in our native garden soils with a lot of water in the summer and humidity actually don't do that well. So they really need a sharper drainage. So gravel gardening affords kind of that type of habitat so that you can grow those plants more successfully.
Yeah, you would almost need to, like you are doing yourself, at least 6 inches of gravel, if not more, just to keep the root zone above the area where the water may puddle below the gravel.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, it obviously can be upfront a greater expense than kind of traditional gardening, but, over time, you really cut down on the water because of the type of plants that you're growing. And then, what I've found with growing plants in like pure gravel is once they've grown through and into the soil below that top, say 4 to 5 inches of gravel is so inhospitable that you can hardly get any weeds feeding into that top layer of gravel.
Oh, give it time.
Yeah, maybe. the weeds, if somebody can figure out how to have a truly weed-free garden, that would be a major trend.
Not going to happen. What are some of the popular succulents there that can overwinter in those gardens back there?
Yeah, so any of a number, and probably most sedums, hens and chicks, which are sempervivums, quite a bit of cactus are actually hardy here. Not like your Mexican type cactus, but a lot of cactus that are native in higher elevation parts of the U.S., like in Colorado, Idaho, Wyoming. Those are hardy here. Quite a few cultivars and species of yuccas, but it's not everything. Not everything that goes into gravel garden has to be a succulent. Like once you establish things like some of the different species of Rudbeckia, or actually a lot of the prairie plants, a lot of the grasses and cone flowers and things like that. Because a lot of them have long taproots to kind of survive in prairie type situations, which have, a multitude of hostile conditions. Once those established, they actually do quite well. Like in my gravel garden at home, I have a plant called the threadleaf blue star, Amsonia hubrichtii. That does quite well. All the baptisias, the false indigos, they have a fairly significant taproot and also do quite well.
And what about the prickly pears?
Oh yeah, prickly pear for sure. Yep, there's different species of prickly pear, but there's actually one that's native to the East Coast, and that does well.
Okay, that's Opuntia for those of you at home keeping score. And out here, that's a weed.
Say, our cactus don't get to be the stature like you see in California. They tend to be either ground covering types or maybe just get a foot or two tall, but not like you would see on the West Coast where they can be, almost tree-like.
Andrew Bunting is with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. He is their Vice President of Public Gardens and Landscapes. And again, more information online at phsonline.org. Andrew, thanks for helping us get off to 2022 to a good gardening start.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, gravel gardening. Does that apply to people in USDA Zone 9, people in the Southwest? Because gravel gardening is not rock gardening. That's an interesting, I'll say, garden fad going on back east and Midwest, but how applicable is that to the warmer areas? Debbie Flower is here, our favorite retired college horticultural professor. And Debbie, basically on what we just heard, that's an interesting idea that they have going back there to be able to grow, say, drought-tolerant plants in 4 to 5 inches of small rock. And they kind of get churlish when you call it rock. They want to call it, garden pebbles or pea rock or something like that.
Yes, well, they certainly have some specifications for the rock to be used. They don't want it to be limestone because that will break down over time. And it should all be sized the same size. So it's not just going to a quarry and digging up a bunch of rock and throwing it in your truck and throwing it over the garden. It's size, so everything is, from what I've been reading and hearing, between a quarter or half inch in size.
Yeah.
And
with smooth sides, too.
With smooth sides, right. So it's a very specific type of rock.
And it could be very expensive.
It could be expensive, especially to get started. Yeah, 4 to 5 inches is quite a bit.
Not to mention fun to move.
Yeah, I have to say that when I have done house hunting in the past, I shy away from homes that have gravel on part of the or all of the landscape because I know that I need to garden and I need to plant things and dig them up and move them and all that fun stuff. And with gravel as the mulch, that makes it more difficult.
When you're growing in that environment here in California or in the Southwest, what are the precautions that you have to take if indeed you do have a rock garden? Heat, I would think, would be a problem.
There are some plants that prefer a mulch of rock or gravel, but 4 to 5 inches is not what I would consider a mulch for those plants. the goal of gardening for me in a hot, dry climate is to create shade and cooler places in the garden in the summertime. And gravel will not allow that because gravel reflects heat and light, especially depending on the color.
And for really, really hot climates like you would find in the Imperial Valley of California or parts of Arizona, New Mexico, even parts of Colorado, I would think that there's even more precautions.
My husband is from Tucson, Arizona, and Tucson has been very aggressive about reducing use of landscape water. What most landscapes have, and in some places you're required to by your CC&Rs, is gravel as a mulch. It is not 4 to 5 inches deep. It's just an inch or two. And it is not sized like they're talking about in the more formal gravel gardens in the Midwest and East. It is just mined. The landscape mining company delivers it, and either you spread it or their people spread it as a mulch. And those tend not to be white. They're not really light colors that do lots of reflection. They are more of the tans and grays, which will do less reflection. And then the result of using that gravel as a mulch is that you don't have grass and you don't have plants that survive in extremely high heat, which of course you're going to experience in the desert, but can be ameliorated somewhat with an organic mulch that will hold more moisture in the soil. So the landscaping then is very southwestern, which is lots of cactus and trees that are native to the Southwest.
In that segment that we heard with Andrew Bunting, he talked about the gravel gardens in Madison, Wisconsin, and he said it's one of the premier locations, and he mentioned the Ulbrich Botanical Gardens. And if you go online, and we'll have a link to it in the newsletter, to what they've done there as far as putting in a pebble garden. The Ulbrich Garden is in Wisconsin, which means they get summer rain.
They get summer rain.
Something we don't get anywhere.
They have humidity. They're near Great Lakes. Yes. And that makes a huge difference, I think, in the success of these gardens. I have to say that in my Central Valley, California garden, which is very hot and dry, I use lots of organic mulch, but I have learned that there are some plants I cannot grow in that organic mulch because it holds too much moisture in the soil and potentially close to the stem. I try to keep it away from the stem, but I'm not in total control. And so some plants just don't do well in that environment. Other plants love it, and so it limits my plant palette. On the other side of it, a gravel mulch that's 4 to 5 inches deep is going to limit your plant palette regardless of where you do it. But in places where there is summer rain and humidity, you'll have a broader plant palette that you can plant in that 4 to 5 inches of gravel.
The link that we'll have with the newsletter refers to a PowerPoint that the director of the Ulbrich Botanical Garden did about their gravel gardens. And if you want to learn more about gravel gardening, you ought to listen to what he has to say, the plant palettes that can be used, and the care that they take during the off season. And one thing that he pointed out was that the staff there do a big job in the wintertime of removing dead organic matter and making sure that there is nothing for weed seeds to lodge in.
Right. Regardless of what you mulch with, weed seeds are going to land on that mulch. And if there's any organic matter or any source of water, they will germinate and grow. And that's, to me, it's more difficult to get the organic matter out of a gravel than to just let it melt into the existing organic mulch that I use in my gardens. By the way, in that PowerPoint, he talks first about meadow gardens, and it's a long PowerPoint. It's about over an hour. Start in the second half if you only want to hear about gravel gardens.
Yeah, about the last 15 minutes, actually.
Yeah, it's quite near the end.
Yeah, you can see it, and you learn a lot. He had a lot of interesting tips there, and he said that when they bring in plants, 1 gallon plants from nurseries, one thing they do is they scrape off the top 2 inches of soil because that's where you're going to find most weed seeds.
He's probably right. You're going to find most weed seeds in the top of a container soil, but it sort of makes me shiver to remove the top 2 inches. There are going to be roots there, or potentially feeder roots there, that you're going to expose and damage potentially, and they may die. In a harsh environment like the Southwest or Central California in summer, that plant needs all the roots and moisture it can get. in a more forgiving environment like Madison, Wisconsin in summer, which has more mild temperatures than we do and has summer rains and humidity, the plant may survive better.
They are beautiful looking gardens back there.
They are.
You know, more power to them if they can do that. I just think that in USDA Zone 9, especially, it would be a struggle.
9 and higher, yeah.
If you want to try it, I'd say, well, try it in a small area first.
A small area where you want the plants that do well there are succulents, so plants that store water themselves, hens and chicks, sedums, dudleyas, those kinds of things, and alpines, plants that grow high. An alpine plant is a plant that grows high up on a mountain, potentially above the tree line, where there's not enough soil to support a tree. And you have scree up there, and scree is broken down rock. So those plants do very well in that area. So if you want to try a section, and they're very interesting, they can be very beautiful, they very interesting flowers, and they tend to be smaller plants, so you can get a lot of them into a small space. It would make a really cool garden to put somewhere that you get up close, near an outdoor sitting area or something.
They also have a lot of ornamental grasses, which looked fabulous by year 3.
Yeah. Grasses, and you talked about prairie plants, which grow in the Midwest, and they have taproots. Generally, plants coming out of containers don't have taproots, but the plants we're talking about here are herbaceous plants and grasses, and so they can regrow their taproot, the grasses for sure. If you see pictures of prairie plants, I wouldn't call them so much taproots as they just have a very extensive root system.
So again, the differences between a rock garden and a gravel garden, we out here in California are familiar with rock gardens. Rock gardens are shallower, maybe 1 inch or 2 inches worth of river rock, really 1.5 inch river rock.
And often accented with larger rocks.
Right. And the gravel garden is just that. It is made out of pea gravel, or in the case of what they did back in Wisconsin, 7/16 of an inch of quartzite. And it has to be not sharp in order for you to be able to walk on it, or more for your pets to walk on it without injury.
Or work it with your hands.
Yeah, or work it. Yeah, and that's the other thing, too, that he pointed out is that when they are cleaning up those areas in the wintertime, everybody has knee pads. Yes.
Knee pads are a good idea to get used to wearing when you're in the garden anyway. I can attest to that, having had to have one of my knees replaced because I didn't always wear knee pads. But the other thing, another point he made was that you don't taper the gravel to the edge of the garden. You have some sort of edging, and he shows you a whole bunch of different types of edging that are 4 to 5 inches tall. So the gravel remains consistently deep.
That would be important. You need a barrier to keep it in place.
Right.
Too. So consider building sort of a little raised bed.
Yes.
For a gravel garden. Yeah. If you're going to try that. And again, it's going to be more expensive because you're using 4 to 5 inches worth.
Yeah.
And if you go out and price a ton of pea gravel, you can borrow on your IRA, I guess, and pay for it, but don't do that.
And delivery.
And then shoveling it.
Yeah, and shoveling it. Yeah.
So rock gardens, gravel gardens, if you're going to try it on a small scale first.
Yeah. See how it goes and let us know.
Debbie Flower, thanks so much for rocking down with us.
Yeah, very interesting stuff, Fred. Thank you.
If you want to hear more of Andrew Bunting of the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society talking about 2022 gardening trends, give a listen to the latest Garden Basics podcast. It's episode 159 that was released on December the 31st.